On today's show, the talk of the town this week has been the issue with WNBA officiating, coming off the contentious game on Tuesday night between the Indiana Fever and the Connecticut Sun. There was eye poking, shoving, pushing, a scuffle, and a ton of technicals and ejections occurred. I'm going to dive into the current grievances and why narratives around WNBA and NBA officiating are so different. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, hello, and welcome. You are Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell, and happy Friday. I'm one of your hosts on this program. I cover the New York Liberty at The Next, which is we are the group that powers Locked On Women's Basketball. And I've covered women's basketball and its culture nationally at many other places. Please check out all of the excellent women's basketball reporting and writing we are doing at thenexthoops.com. And please consider subscribing to make sure that the journalists that work so hard to cover this sport are paid for their valuable work. Anyway, we thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen each and every day. So before we get started, I just want to lay out our whole show. As you can see, I don't have a guest with me, at least not yet. But in segment 1, I'm going to point out why officiating has been such an issue in the W as of late. We'll hear from Liberty head coach Sandy Brondello. I asked her a question about the state of officiating at the game last night. In segment 2, I will bring on Lucas Kaplan, who you might know from his incredibly insightful work at NetDaily, to explain to us why the narrative around officiating is so different on the NBA side. And lastly, in segment 3, I'll take you through why the W doesn't have the same officiating protocols as the NBA. And we'll look at some of the steps the league might take to address the issues. So, okay, let's get right into it. So obviously this discourse began on Tuesday night after the Indiana Fever clinched a trip to the Commissioner's Cup Finals. The Fever had won pretty handily, but after Jacy Sheldon's physical coverage guarding Caitlin Clark, the tensions between these two teams exploded. There were 6 technical fouls assessed to Caitlin Clark, Tina Charles, Marina Mabrey, Lindsay Allen, Jacy Sheldon, and Anissa Morrow. Players were ejected, including Sophie Cunningham. Obviously, if you all have seen the video, it was Cunningham got this flagrant 2 for throwing Sheldon to the ground while trying to put a layup in the basket in transition. And so after all of this tension and the scuffle that resulted of Cunningham throwing Sheldon's head to the ground, Fever head coach Stephanie White really put the officials for the evening to task. She said, players are faster, they're better, they're bigger, they're stronger. They're as good as they've ever been, as athletic as they've ever been. The game is fast. Now things are happening quickly. Everybody's getting better except the officials. So we got to find a way to remedy it. I mean, you've heard every coach talk about it, so I don't know what the answer is. So I asked New York Liberty head coach Sandy Brondello what the answer might be and why this issue has reached a tipping point after years of players and coaches speaking privately and publicly about the inconsistency and lack of action from officials during games. Also, The Athletic's Ben Pickman has a question for Brondello on officiating as well. Let's take a listen.
side, there isn't this narrative. But in the W side, this has been a constant discussion for years and years and years. Is it? Yeah, I think it is a little bit in the NBA side, isn't it? I think it's everywhere. Every sport is going to talk about the officiating. And I know it's hard. What we all do is hard, isn't it? I'm not going to be perfect. My players are not going to be perfect, but it's about learning and being better and from game to game. I suppose it's just a little bit more inconsistency sometimes that we get within a game from a quarter with two different teams, how it's being officiated. I suppose most of our best officials go to the NBA too. So we're always having to develop new ones. And I think when you have to officiate in college and WNBA, it's two different rules. You only can get better when you're playing in one system. It's like if, obviously FIBA rules are a little bit different, but it's still the same line, it's just a defensive 3 second and on offense and D. So that's what's changed there. So look, we just got to keep plugging away. I'm sure they're going to keep working and we've just got to stay the course. And for me, it's we can't get into that narrative. We got to worry about ourselves. We want to have championship habits and that's about getting better day to day.
A little bit of what Jackie asked about, in the NBA, fines are fully transparent in terms of players and coaches. The WNBA seems to selectively announce when coaches, players, and teams get fined. I guess, do you feel like there should be complete transparency as it relates to fines?
Oh, man, you really guys make me talk about the officiating. Yes, I think it is. Why not? It's, if we get fined, shouldn't it just say we've been fined? I mean, there's a respect for the game as well too, but it should go both ways. I think that's the most important thing. But look, I don't want to get fined here too, but I just got to go out and do my job to the best of the ability. And we have to, don't let the officials impact the way that we play. So that's always my messaging to the players.
So let's unpack a little bit of what Brondello had to say, shall we? So she was talking about the fact that officials that are in the WNBA often get promoted to the NBA. And these are also officials that are maybe not paid a full salary when working for the WNBA. And as a result, like many others working in this space, you have to take on other jobs if that means officiating the college game. And as Brondello said, that can be apples and oranges at times. And that leads to some of these inconsistencies in calls. And so I just want to point out one example of what Brondello is referring to. And so there's an official in the NBA, their name is Che Flores, who has been profiled by GQ as the first non-binary official in the NBA. But Che actually started their career officiating the WNBA. And at the time, they were not out as a non-binary person, and they went by Cheryl. And I remember seeing them at many WNBA games that I covered. I will attach Che Flores's bio to the link in the show notes, and you can see for yourself. And so this is exactly what Brondello is talking about. Officiating in the WNBA continues to be treated like a stepping stone or something of less importance than, let's say, the NBA. So as we know, Kathy Engelbert and her staff have worked extremely hard on making the W into an entertainment property that's taken seriously and professional. That must continue with officiating and the officiating pipeline. Okay, so coming up, I'm going to welcome Lucas Kaplan to the show to discuss narratives about officiating and why they're very different in the WNBA versus the MNBA and how that's something to consider. So that is what's coming up. Stay with us. Shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting. But between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel overwhelming. That's why I love using Car Gurus. They help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, Car Gurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the US. They verify dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data you need to make the right choice without second guessing yourself. It's no wonder similar web estimated traffic data shows Car Gurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site. Buy or sell your next car today with Car Gurus at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's cargurus.com, cargurus.com. Well, thank you very much, Car Gurus. We appreciate you. Now, in our second segment, I would like to welcome friend of the show, Lucas Kaplan. I'm welcoming Lucas Kaplan to the show for segment 2 to get into the difference between officiating in the WNBA and in the NBA. Lucas Kaplan has covered both leagues, and so he really understands how physicality is officiated, but also, more importantly, the narratives that come from this officiating. So, Lucas, I think where I want to start is talk to us about when there's a major officiating issue in the NBA. What does the debate usually sound and look like?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, first of all. And second of all, it's not to say that people don't have frequent issues and don't love to complain about officiating in the NBA. I think even the most casual NBA fans would know that. But I would say the main difference in terms of what it sounds like, what the main talking points are, is that the players are still the drivers of the league in terms of, we talked about it off air, the on-court politics of the league. The refs are not expected to police the league really and to take responsibility for things that the players do on the court. Before getting into any specifics, it's pro basketball in both leagues. Things happen in both leagues. Players go over the line. But in the NBA, I think you hear more of this reflected on the players themselves. Whereas even if there's an officiating mistake or something people don't agree with, whether a call or a punishment like a fine or a flagrant or whatever, it's not a referendum on what the league is doing to protect the players. Whereas in the W, I've often found that is the case. I know we're going to talk about what happened with Indiana and Connecticut, but it seems to me like the referees just take such an outsized responsibility, regardless of if they've made the correct decisions or not, on the actions that are ultimately, done and performed and reacted to by the players who are the drivers of the league. Like they're adults. They can take responsibility is sort of, what I'm saying in a sense.
For sure. And I think another question I actually have for you is a lot of the narratives that we're hearing about officiating is about the fact that it isn't consistent. Mm-hmm. And so I guess, is that also an issue in the NBA? Are there consistency issues, or is that also where there's a difference between the two leagues also?
Yeah, there's definitely consistency issues. Players with reputations get refereed differently. I think, again, casual fans of the NBA will probably, see this. There's even Draymond Green, who we were talking about off air. It's almost a running joke now that if he gets one technical, he's allowed to say or do whatever he wants to the referees, and that, they won't tee him up the second time. Obviously, the W has much, much more, to do in terms of like the reaction, I would say, is not always consistent. For example, we're, probably going to talk about Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark. And I mean, you can just imagine how some of the discourse might differ if a Black player were to have committed one of these flagrant fouls. particularly on Caitlin. We don't need to go down that road maybe right now, but the varying ways in which consistency is applied, that does change between the NBA and the WNBA.
I mean, we can take a look at some examples, right?
Yeah.
So last year, when Kennedy Carter had the push off and the flagrant on Caitlin Clark, I feel like the reception to that was very different than Jacy Sheldon versus Caitlin Clark.
100%. And the thing about, I'm glad you brought up Kennedy Carter, because what do we hear all the time after that? What is the league going to do to protect their most valuable asset? I mean, those string of words talking about the NBA would be unfathomable. I mean, flagrant foul over the line or not, it is basketball and stuff does happen. And you know what? It's perfectly okay, even in a situation for, Caitlin's getting a lot of hype. Yeah, she's talking a lot. Yeah, she is 30 on us. Maybe here's a hard foul. That is such a natural sort of course of action in a basketball game. And yet it feels like WNBA players are not allowed to, play basketball in that sense without it becoming a referendum on what is the league, what are the officials going to do about this? Whereas in the NBA, it's the players really driving the on-court, politics, if you will, of the game.
No, that's incredibly fascinating. And I think you and I were talking off air that the reason behind this, or at least something that could be causing this, is because people view the WNBA with maybe some sort of paternalistic, attitudes.
Yeah. I think that is exactly what it is. The players are often not allowed to have the same freedoms in terms of committing a hard foul, going over the line, and having it just be that, and not having it be a referendum on the state of the league. And also, the players don't often get to take responsibility if maybe they do commit a foul that goes over the line. It's always immediately goes up to the league. What are the officials? What is the league going to do about this? It's not, hey, this guy, as you often hear in the NBA, this guy needs to get it together. This guy needs to stop having these fouls. This isn't okay, or maybe it is okay. It's all on his shoulders. And it is sort of, I do think, takes a paternalistic tone where the women of this league aren't allowed to just play competitive basketball at the highest level, warts and all.
So that's a great point, because I don't think a lot of the chatter was saying, oh man, did Sophie Cunningham take it too far? Oh, did Marina Mabrey take this too far? That wasn't what people were talking about. It was Caitlin. I mean, I do think there has been some discussion about Caitlin being an instigator of some of this drama, which I think that more is along the lines of what you're saying, which is talk about this in relation to the players.
Yeah. And if Sophie Cunningham went over the line and committed a hard foul, then it is absolutely on her. And that happens over the course of an NBA, a WNBA season. And it's up to the league, certainly, to hand down punishment, whatever, as they see fit. But it is also not, a referendum on how we're going to protect Caitlin Clark, or how Sophie Cunningham was totally justified this, and that because the referees didn't step in. That's where I think the discourse differs, and, where it doesn't need to for professional athletes at the highest level.
Yeah. And, I think in both leagues, it's important to note that athletes should be held accountable when they go over the line. I mean, there's a lot of talk as of late about, women being competitive. That's a good thing. That should be allowed. But there's a difference between a scuffle, which scuffles I think can be very fun, and between, putting someone's health at risk, putting someone at risk for a serious concussion or other serious injury. So I guess I think maybe there's a responsibility on the officials to hold players accountable.
Certainly. And that is the job description. It may be not in the sense of defining the league as a whole. And again, you hear a lot with Caitlin Clark. What are we going to do to make sure our most valuable asset and our product is the most profitable that it can be? But of course, if a player shows, repeated flagrant fouls going over the line, it then becomes on the league to handle that. And I mean, the NBA's had to go through it often. Draymond Green committed a bunch of flagrant fouls and was ultimately given an indefinite suspension. I'm not saying that's an apples to apples comparison for anybody in the W, but that was fine. And it was about Draymond, and it was about what the league deemed to be a, what's the word I'm looking for? Appropriate response. And some people disagreed and some people didn't, and that's fine. And again, the same thing we're going back to is it wasn't about protecting the NBA. It wasn't about protecting the competition. It was about recognizing a guy kept going too far and you had to dole out a response. And, whatever, if the WNBA feels like it's going to come to that with a player eventually, they can do that. And it doesn't have to be a referendum on the whole product or the state of players and their on-court relationships or whatever as a whole.
No, for sure. I mean, I guess before we move on to segment 3, something I've been hearing a lot about is this notion of what the Jordan rule was. I guess how does that relate to this conversation, or does it not at all?
Well, it's certainly an interesting parallel, right? Because you had an electric young star in Michael Jordan, and the Jordan rules were very famously deployed by the Detroit Pistons, and they were among things like sending him to his left on drives, playing him, for a pull or to get all the way to the rim if he went right. It was also, if this guy tries to dunk on you, if he goes flying through the air, his signature move, you foul him and then you take him out of the air. You just deploy an extreme level of physicality. And did that become a referendum on the product, on if he was ever going to ascend to stardom? No, it sort of had to just become a path on a roadblock on his basketball journey to overcome. And obviously the parallel here is with Caitlin Clark, who is, no doubt a generational talent and has brought a lot of viewers to the WNBA as, Michael Jordan did the NBA, but you don't really hear the physicality, even the hard fouls, even Jacy Sheldon, a longtime college rival, poking her in the eye. These are never just basketball obstacles she has to overcome, or too often they're not. I don't want to pretend everybody's saying the same thing, but instead it becomes, why in her professional career is the WNBA trying to stifle, their most exciting player? People try to win games. We all see it. Caitlin pisses people off. She talks a lot. I'm not saying that means you have to flagrant foul her all the time, but things are going to happen in the course of a basketball game. And if you listen to her, she knows that. And it is basketball. And that's really the parallel there. And that I wish it were more like the Jordan rules. Those were all basketball, give or take.
Well, coming up, I'm going to get into what the WNBA is going to look to move forward from all of this and move forward from all the pressure that they're getting when it comes to the officiating. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you are wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights. It's giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop huge outdoor selection. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. I love that jingle. But anyway, let's return to the show. Thank you very much, Wayfair. I'm going to get into this idea of what exactly the WNBA can do to move past this pressure, which I know might be a bit counterintuitive to the previous points made by Lucas. But we did also state that player health and safety are paramount. The WNBA and the MNBA don't want players getting concussed or suffering major injuries because of contact on the floor. Now, according to Lucas Seehofer's WNBA injury tracker, which I will attach in the show notes, there have been 4 concussions this year. Shakira Austin, Rakia Jackson, Paige Beckers, and Asia Wilson. This has yielded 12 missed games for all of those players combined. So let's get into it exactly. What is done on the NBA side to provide some sort of accountability and transparency? Well, as you heard Ben ask Sandy, in the NBA, you always know when coaches are fined for saying something about the officials. But also, in the NBA, there is something called a 2-minute report. And this is in the MNBA. It's an assessment of officiated events that occurred in the last 2 minutes of a game that were within 3 points during any point in the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter and or overtime when that's necessary. And so the plays assessed, it's all calls, whistles, and notable non-calls. And so, but in the W, there isn't a such thing as a 2-minute report. Reporters have to request pool reports when there's something that media members would like to be explained. Annie Costabile of Front Office Sports and Maddie Kenny of the New York Post asked Mercury head coach Nate Tibbetts last night about fines and also about why he believes 2-minute reports aren't used yet in the WNBA. Let's take a quick listen to what Nate has to say.
Fines for coaches, fines for players, even officiating. I'm curious when you consider, again, the league transparency from the NBA side, what you think maybe is lacking here in the W?
Yeah, I think that's, it's not something that I've thought about personally. But from a league perspective, and obviously just our fans in general, it's probably something that we should look at. I think our fans probably deserve that. See what happens when the fines happen, and what kind of penalty or fine is made to each individual person or player.
The 2-minute report, do you think that's something the WNBA would benefit from, incorporating? Or I don't even know if you've looked at the 2-minute report, but just something that.
Yeah, I think that's something that our league should look at. It's from everything I've heard, it's a financial reason why we're not doing it. Just the resources that it takes. Hopefully, as our league grows, that is something that we'll see in the future.
So that was interesting to hear from Nate Tibbetts, someone who has an NBA coaching background. He was an assistant for many years. He talks about the financial costs, and that's the reason why there are less opportunities here for 2-minute reports. And, when it comes to the fines, before I expand upon the financials of it all, in one of Annie Constabile's recent stories in Front Office Sports, she pulled a clip from Cheryl Reeve, who was on Richard Deitch's sports media podcast. And Reeve essentially said that the reason for the lack of transparency is because if you're transparent about what fines are and the price that you're fining someone, it might perpetuate the narrative that players and coaches aren't worth very much and that the leagues and the teams aren't paying them very much. But, we live in a different world now where coaches are making over $1 million and there's a new CBA on the way. So that's worth thinking about. But also, going back to the financials of all of this, Emma Bacalari wrote something really interesting in Sports Illustrated. I will attach that in the show notes as well. In addition to pool reports, it's worth noting that the reason WNBA challenges can be a bit arbitrary is because the folks who make the calls are the ones viewing the film rather than what happens in the MNBA, where they have an off-site replay center in Secaucus, New Jersey. So any call that goes to a replay review is seen by someone that doesn't have a bias and was not in the arena and is removed from what's going on. So the W has replays handled on the court by the same officials that make the call. So that's another resource gap as well. So before I sign off, I do want to say that the WNBA is working on this. It might take some time. Back in December, after one of the narratives coming out of that 2024 finals was the wonky officiating on both sides, in a finals that was the most watched in 25 years, the league began hiring a couple positions that seemed quite relevant to fixing some of these issues. So first is a WNBA referee performance development advisor, and the second is a WNBA referee operations analyst. So the latter person is Stephanie Guerrera, who is someone who was promoted to this role after being a game analyst for the NBA for over 6 years before taking on this WNBA job in March. So some change is happening, but maybe not quickly enough. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft. Get comprehensive NBA draft analysis from experts. And check out the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft on NBA Big Board and Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever you listen to your pods. I want to give a huge shout out to Lucas Kaplan for joining me for a segment. You can find him on social media at lucaskaplan.blueskysocial or on X at lucaskaplan_. I will attach his work to the show notes at NetDaily. Check it out. You will learn a lot. I learn from Lucas each and every day. This has been Jackie Powell, and I'm signing off. Have a great weekend, everyone.